There is a moment, subtle but unmistakable, when anger begins to rise inside a person. It doesn't arrive suddenly or violently at first. It begins as a tightening in the chest, a quickening of breath, a slight tremor of impatience. The mind sharpens, the heart hardens, and a strange clarity appears, one that feels like truth but is nothing more than emotion impersonating wisdom. This is the moment Confucius warned us about, the moment when a person is most tempted to speak words that do not reflect who they truly are, but who they temporarily become when overtaken by emotion. Before we go deeper, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more teachings of wisdom, clarity, and inner mastery inspired by Confucius. Confucius understood something that modern psychology now confirms. Anger is not just a feeling. Anger is a distortion of perception. It narrows the field of vision, magnifies faults, minimizes nuance, and reduces complexity into simple, rigid certainties. A mind in anger becomes a weapon pointed outward but loaded inward, and nothing reveals the state of a person's inner cultivation more quickly than the words they release when they are controlled by this distortion. That is why Confucius said, "When anger rises, think of the consequences." But he did not mean consequences in the shallow sense of regret or punishment. He meant the deeper consequences, the erosion of virtue, the quiet damage to trust, the weakening of one's inner harmony. Because every word spoken in anger is a crack in the structure of the self. A wise person knows this. A wise person sees that anger tempts the tongue to betray the heart, that a moment of rage can undo years of discipline, that a single sentence spoken in emotional heat can reshape a relationship, sometimes permanently. In Confucianism, speech is not merely communication, it is a direct reflection of one's character. And no moment tests character more than the moment anger tightens its grip. The irony is that intelligent people often fail this test more than others. Not because they are weak, but because intelligence can disguise anger as truth. It can dress emotion as logic. It can make a man believe that what he feels intensely must be what is right. But Confucius taught that the moment anger rises, clarity disappears. And a tongue without clarity is a blade without control. There are 5 types of statements a wise person avoids in the heat of anger. Not because these statements are forbidden, but because they reveal the most dangerous impulses of an ungoverned heart. These are the words that wound deepest, age worst, and echo longest. But before we name them, we must understand one more thing. Controlling one's speech in anger is not suppression, it is mastery. It is the refusal to let a temporary storm define a permanent truth about who you are. Anger does something peculiar to the human mind. It convinces us that the present moment is the whole truth. It compresses time, narrows awareness, and makes a single emotion feel like the absolute reality of everything. Confucius understood this long before neuroscience gave it language. He warned that a person in anger is not themselves. They are the temporary version of themselves shaped by fire, not by virtue. And this is precisely why certain words spoken in anger carry such destructive power. They come from a distorted self, not the true one. The first thing a wise person never says when angry is a statement of identity. Phrases like, "you always," "you never," "this is just who you are." Confucius taught that assigning fixed identities to others is the mark of an undisciplined heart. Why? Because such words freeze a moment into a lifetime. They turn a single failing, a single mistake, a single moment of weakness into a permanent accusation. And once spoken, these labels linger long after anger fades. They shape how a person sees themselves, how they see you, and how the relationship evolves. When anger pushes someone to reduce another human being to a sentence, a wise person remains silent. Not because they are passive, but because they understand the power of identity to either destroy or restore. Confucius valued harmony, but not the shallow harmony of silence. He valued the deeper harmony built upon mutual dignity. And dignity dies the moment a person is defined by their worst moment. The second thing a wise person never says when angry is a threat, explicit or subtle. Threats may feel powerful in the moment, but Confucius warned that they erode both trust and authority. A threat born from anger reflects not strength, but instability. It signals that emotion has overtaken judgment, and once spoken, the person who hears it becomes more guarded, more distant, more self-protective. The relationship shifts from cooperation to cautiousness. A wise person understands that threats poison the future. They create an environment where honesty becomes dangerous. And when honesty becomes dangerous, connection dissolves. The third thing a wise person never says when angry is a statement meant to wound deliberately, phrases crafted to strike at the softest places inside another person. These words do not emerge from truth. They emerge from pain seeking more pain. Confucius taught that the noble person acts from virtue even when provoked, especially when provoked. Because when anger guides the tongue, cruelty can masquerade as honesty. And cruelty, once spoken, leaves marks that time may soften but never fully erase. A wise person, Confucius would say, does not fight fire with fire. They let the flame pass through them without burning others. They protect the dignity of all involved, not because the other person deserves it in that moment, but because they themselves are committed to virtue. These first three categories of dangerous speech are the ones most people fall into instinctively. They emerge quickly, effortlessly, as if anger itself were speaking through the mouth. But Confucius taught that the cultivation of character is the ability to interrupt instinct with awareness, to stand guard at the gate of one's own words. The remaining two types of statements, perhaps the most subtle and destructive, reveal the deepest fractures of an unregulated heart. There is a point in anger where emotion becomes clever. It no longer shouts, no longer lashes out. Instead, it begins to use intelligence as a weapon. It crafts words that sound reasonable, even righteous, but are born from the same distortion that blinds the heart. Confucius warned that this stage is the most dangerous because the person speaking no longer believes they are angry, they believe they are correct. The fourth thing a wise person never says in anger is a declaration of finality. Statements like, "I'm done," "This is over," "There's no point anymore," or "I don't care." These words are rarely true. They are emotional exits disguised as clarity. Confucius understood that final statements made in temporary emotions create permanent fractures. They close doors that were never meant to be closed, shut down conversations that still needed to be had, and cut ties that could have been repaired with patience. A person in anger often believes these statements are expressions of strength, but Confucius taught that real strength lies in endurance, not escape. When someone speaks in absolutes while angry, they are not being decisive, they are being overwhelmed. They are letting a momentary feeling pretend to be a lifelong conclusion. And the tragedy is that these declarations often outlive the anger that created them. The fifth thing a wise person never says when angry, and perhaps the most subtle of all, is a sentence that exposes their own moral inconsistency. Anger has a unique ability to reveal the very flaws we deny. When upset, a person might say things like, "I don't need to explain myself," or "I'm not wrong," or "This is just how I am." These are not expressions of truth, but shield statements, words created to protect the ego from introspection. Confucius taught that the wise are cautious with such statements because they lock a person into their least conscious self. They declare the very thing Confucianism seeks to undo, the idea that a person is fixed, unchangeable, incapable of refinement. When someone says, "This is just who I am in anger," what they truly mean is, "I'm unwilling to examine myself right now." And perhaps this is why Confucius viewed anger as a profound moral test. It does not simply show how a person feels, it reveals how a person thinks, what they fear, what they hide, and what they have yet to refine. Anger strips away pretense. It exposes the fractures in character that ordinary life keeps concealed. A wise person knows this. They understand that every word spoken in anger becomes evidence of the self they are still working to cultivate, that the tongue reveals the heart more quickly than any action, and so they choose silence not as avoidance, but as protection. Protection of their integrity, their relationships, and their commitment to the path of self-cultivation. Confucius believed that a single unnecessary word spoken in anger can delay years of harmony. But a single moment of restraint can prevent years of regret. To master anger is not to suppress it. It is to refuse to let it speak on your behalf. If there is one truth Confucius returned to again and again, it is this: the state of a person's speech reveals the state of their inner world. When a person speaks from clarity, their words harmonize with virtue. When they speak from anger, their words harmonize with chaos. And the tragedy and lesson is that most people only regret the chaos after it has already left their mouth. A wise person understands that anger is not merely an emotion, but a shift in consciousness. It changes the mind's priorities. It narrows moral vision. It makes the ego thirsty for validation and allergic to humility. When angry, a person does not seek truth. They seek victory. They do not aim to understand. They aim to justify. Confucius called this the clouding of the heart. When emotion becomes the lens through which everything is interpreted, this is why a wise person practices restraint. Not silence born from fear, but silence born from awareness. They know that the words formed during anger do not belong to their higher self. They belong to the unrefined part of them, the part still in need of cultivation. And Confucius taught that to allow that part to speak freely is to let the worst within you represent the best of who you are. But restraint is not easy. When anger floods the mind, restraint feels unnatural, even impossible. The body demands expression. The ego demands release. The moment demands reaction. Yet Confucius insisted that this exact moment, the moment of emotional pressure, is the defining moment of character. If you cannot remain steady when offended, he taught, your virtue is not yet complete. People often misunderstand anger as the problem. Anger is not the problem. Anger is the signal. It exposes where the heart is still ungoverned, where pride still lives, where fear still hides, where desire for control still clings. A wise person does not apologize later for what they didn't mean. They refine themselves early enough that such words never arise. This refinement requires 3 forms of inner discipline that Confucius considered essential. 1. Awareness before reaction. A wise person feels anger rising and recognizes it as a shift in perception, not a shift in truth. They pause not to suppress emotion, but to prevent distortion from becoming speech. 2. Separation of emotion from identity. A wise person understands, I am feeling anger is not the same as I am anger. They distinguish the temporary from the permanent, the state from the self. 3. Commitment to harmony over victory. Confucius taught that harmony is not passive. It is the active choice to preserve connection, clarity, and dignity, even when one feels justified in destroying all 3. When these disciplines are absent, a person becomes reactive, fragile, easy to provoke. Confucius called such people like drums, loudly responding to every touch. But the wise become like still water, disturbed only on the surface, calm in their depth. And here lies the insight modern people forget. Anger exposes who controls you. Restraint reveals who controls yourself. Confucius believed that mastery over speech during anger is not a small skill. It is the very foundation of self-cultivation, because if a person cannot govern their tongue, they cannot govern their life. Confucius believed that the greatest battles a person ever fights are not fought with others. They are fought within themselves. And nowhere is this battle more visible than in the moments when anger takes control. Anger does not simply distort judgment. It exposes the cracks in a person's self-cultivation. It shows how quickly virtue collapses when the heart is shaken. It reveals whether one's discipline is genuine or merely theoretical. The true danger of speaking in anger is not the damage done to others, although that damage can be great. The true danger is the damage done to oneself. Every time a person gives their anger permission to speak, they reinforce the belief that emotion, not principle, has the right to lead. They strengthen the reflex to react instead of respond. They deepen the grooves of impatience, impulsiveness, and pride. Confucius understood that most people do not notice this inner erosion. They focus on the conflict, the argument, the moment. They apologize afterward and believe that everything has returned to normal. But Confucius saw what modern psychology echoes. Patterns form in silence. Character is shaped in private. The words a person uses, especially under pressure, slowly construct who they will become. Anger becomes a habit, then a personality, and finally, a fate. That is why Confucius emphasized again and again that self-government begins with speech. A person who cannot govern their tongue cannot govern their impulses. A person who cannot govern their impulses cannot govern their judgment. And a person who cannot govern their judgment cannot govern the direction of their life. When a wise person remains silent during anger, people often mistake it for coldness. They think the wise are uncaring or distant, but the wise are not distant. They are disciplined. They recognize the weight of words. They recognize the permanence of what is spoken and the impermanence of emotion. They know that once a word leaves the mouth, it cannot be retrieved, reshaped, or softened. It enters the heart of another person and becomes part of their memory, their story, their understanding of who you are. Confucius taught that the superior person protects others from their own worst moments, not out of fear, but out of virtue, out of respect for harmony, both social and internal, out of reverence for the responsibility that comes with speech. And here is the deeper insight. What a person says when angry reveals what they refuse to confront when calm. If they accuse others of selfishness, it often reflects their own insecurity. If they lash out with harsh labels, it reflects their fear of inadequacy. If they speak in absolutes, it reflects their inability to tolerate imperfection. If they make threats, it reflects a lack of emotional maturity. If they defend their flaws with pride, it reflects an unexamined heart. Anger is not a mirror of the world, it is a mirror of the self. This is why the wise take anger seriously, not as a moral failing, but as a teacher, a revelation, a moment where the mask slips and the truth of the heart emerges. And they work to refine that heart, not just control it, because they understand that mastery over speech requires mastery over emotion, and mastery over emotion requires understanding oneself at the deepest level. A wise person does not aim to never feel anger. They aim to never let anger define who they are. When Confucius spoke about anger, he wasn't concerned with the dramatic outbursts people often imagine. He was concerned with something quieter, deeper, more dangerous. The subtle ways anger reshapes a person's moral landscape. It pushes them away from the path of virtue without them noticing. It changes their tone, their posture, their perception, their judgment. And if left unchecked, it alters the direction of their life. Anger is not evil. Confucius never taught that. Anger is simply a signal, an alarm that something inside the heart is misaligned. But the problem is that most people treat the alarm as justification. They use it to validate whatever words rise to the tongue, whatever impulse pushes forward, whatever interpretation feels true in the moment. They do not realize that the alarm is not there to be obeyed, but to be understood. A wise person listens to anger the way a healer listens to pain, not as truth, but as information, not as a command, but as a clue. They do not silence anger through suppression, nor do they unleash it through aggression. They observe it, question it, and let it reveal what still needs refinement. Because Confucius taught that the heart is like a garden, whatever grows there, virtue or chaos, is a reflection of what has been tended. This is why the 5 kinds of statements spoken in anger are so revealing. They expose the inner terrain. They show where pride still lives, where fear still hides, where insecurity still controls, where impatience still governs. And the wise understand that these are not enemies, they are invitations. Invitations to cultivate patience, humility, clarity, compassion, and restraint. The path of Confucianism has never been about perfection. It has always been about alignment between thought and action, between emotion and judgment, between speech and virtue. And nothing tests this alignment more fiercely than the moment anger reaches the tongue. A person who speaks recklessly in anger may not realize that they are shaping their character with every syllable. A person who restrains themselves in anger is shaping something far greater, their destiny. Because the world respects force, but heaven respects mastery. And mastery begins with the smallest discipline, the discipline over words spoken when one's heart is on fire. Confucius believed that if a person wished to cultivate wisdom, they must first cultivate their mouth. Silence during anger is not weakness. It is strength. It is clarity. It is choosing harmony over haste, virtue over impulse, wisdom over self-defense. It is the refusal to let a temporary emotion stain a permanent relationship or corrupt one's character. And here is the final truth Confucius would leave us with. A wise person does not seek to win when angry. They seek to remain worthy of being listened to when the anger has passed. Because when the emotion fades, when the mind clears, when the heart settles, a single question remains. Did I honor my character, or did I abandon it? A wise person chooses honor, not perfection, not silence, but honor, rooted in clarity, guided by virtue, shaped by restraint. And through this, they transform anger from a moment of weakness into a doorway to self-mastery.